Welcome to this Rehabilitation Services Administration Technical Assistance Program on the Vocational Rehabilitation Services portion of the WIOA State Plan 2020. My name is Terry Martin, and I'm joined by my State Monitoring and Program Improvement Division colleagues, Jim Doyle, Shannon Moeller, April Trice, and Jason Hunter. During this program, we will address the requirements of the Vocational Rehabilitation Services portion of the Unified and Combined State Plan, descriptions J through Q.
Description J, Statewide Assessment. In accordance with the Rehabilitation Act and 34 CFR 361.29A and 363.11G of the VR regulations, VR agencies should thoroughly and clearly describe the results of the comprehensive statewide needs assessment in this description, since this information serves as a foundation for the development of state plan goals, priorities, and strategies. Important points to consider when developing this description. The comprehensive statewide needs assessment must be jointly conducted with the SRC and include the needs of individuals with the most significant disabilities, including their need for supported employment services, individuals with disabilities who are minorities, underserved or unserved services through components of the SWB system, and youth and students with disabilities. In addition, the comprehensive statewide needs assessment must be completed every 3 years and include the need to establish, develop, or improve CRPs, and must be consistent with the development and implementation of innovation and expansion initiatives.
Description K, Annual Estimates. Section 101A of the Rehabilitation Act, as amended by WIOA, and 34 CFR Sections 361.29B and 363.11 of the regulations require all VR agencies to annually conduct a full assessment of their resources and ability to serve all eligible individuals before the start of the federal fiscal year. Description K of the VR portion of the state plan must provide annual estimates for the next full federal fiscal year using the following projections. 1, the number of individuals in the state who are eligible for VR and supported employment services. 2, the number of eligible individuals who receive services under the VR program, the supported employment program, and for each priority category, if the agency has established an order of selection or will be implementing an order of selection with the approval of the state plan. If the VR agency has implemented or will be implementing an order of selection with the approval of the state plan, the number of individuals who are eligible for VR services but will not be receiving services due to the order of selection, and the cost of services based on the number of individuals estimated to receive services during the federal fiscal year. If the VR agency is under an order selection, identify the cost of services for each priority category based on the number of individuals who are expected to be served. It is important that the VR agency develop a comprehensive analysis to fully assess its fiscal resources in the coming federal fiscal year using the most up-to-date information. This analysis should factor in all relevant factors that may increase or decrease the number of individuals served and the cost to provide VR and supported employment services. This description must be updated with the submission of the 4-year state plan and the modifications made at the 2-year modification process. In addition, as noted before, the analysis must be conducted annually by the VR agency before the start of the federal fiscal year. Projections for the next full federal fiscal year is expected to include federal fiscal year 2021. Description L, Goals and Priorities. Section 101A of the Rehabilitation Act, as amended by WIOA, and 34 CFR Section 361.29B of the VR regulations require VR agencies to describe its goals and priorities of the state carrying out its vocational rehabilitation and supported employment programs. Description L of the VR portion of the state plan must identify the State Rehabilitation Council and the VR agency jointly developed and agreed to the goals and priorities. Goals and priorities must be reviewed annually and revised as appropriate. If revised, a state plan amendment is required to be submitted and approved. The goals and priorities must be based on the results of the comprehensive statewide needs assessment under Description J from the most recently conducted state plan. Must also include the performance indicators in accordance with Section 106 of the Rehabilitation Act and 116 of WIOA. It must also include other relevant information affecting the operations and performance of the VR agency, such as the State Rehabilitation Council's annual reports, recent monitoring reports, and internal or state audits conducted. When developing goals and priorities, the VR agency should ensure it's consistent with the results of the most recently conducted statewide needs assessment, should reflect the needs identified under the statewide needs assessment, and should be developed in a meaningful and not generalized manner. The goals and priorities should clearly identify how the VR agency plans to improve the VR and supported employment outcomes, improve or meet performance requirements, and other needs identified in the statewide needs assessment. Although these statutorily required updates are reported every 4 years submission and the 2-year modification of the state plan, the VR agency must also gather and analyze this data on an annual basis. Description M, order of selection. If a VR agency does not believe it has sufficient resources to serve all eligible individuals receiving vocational rehabilitation or supported employment services for the next full federal fiscal year, it must provide an order of selection under Description M of the VR portion of the state plan pursuant to Section 101A.15 of the Rehabilitation Act as amended by WIOA and 34 CFR Section 361.29B of the VR regulations. If the VR agency is implementing order selection or continuing its implementation of an order selection, the determination must be supported by analysis provided under Description K, annual estimates. Description M must include the following information: the order to be followed in selecting eligible individuals to be provided VR services based on the priority categories, justification for implementing or continuing to implement the order of selection, the services and outcome goals, and the time the goals may be achieved for each priority category, including each type of outcome, and a description how individuals with the most significant disability will be served first. Description M must also identify if the VR agency has elected to serve eligible individuals who require specific VR services or equipment to maintain employment. It should be noted that if a VR agency elects to serve those who require VR services or equipment to maintain employment, there must be an immediate need for services or equipment to prevent the individual from losing his or her job. This option is not intended to provide an additional VR services for individuals already requesting VR services or post-employment services. Description M must also be consistent with Assurance 4C under the Assurance section of the VR portion of the state plan. For Assurance 4C, the VR agency would select no, that the agency is not able to serve all eligible individuals in the state. A couple additional points to remember when submitting Description M. The definition of each priority category must be based on the definition of individuals with significant disability as defined at 34 CFR Section 361.5 C30, which requires that an individual has a physical or mental impairment that significantly limits one or more functional capacities, who is expected to require multiple VR services over an extended period of time, and who has a disability or disabilities as determined on the basis of an assessment causing substantial functional limitations. Therefore, this definition for the priority category should not create a higher standard. Also, please ensure the justification is thorough, logical, and consistent with the annual estimates in Description K, based on the number of individuals identified and not sufficient resources for the next full federal fiscal year. The VR agency must ensure that individuals who do not meet the order of selection criteria and have been placed on a wait list will have access to services provided through the information and referral system established under 34 CFR Section 361.37. This description must be updated with the submission of the 4-year state plan and the modifications of the 2 years. In addition, as noted before, this analysis must be conducted annually by the VR agency before the start of the federal fiscal year.
Description in Goals and Plans for Distribution of Title VI Funds in accordance with the Rehabilitation Act and 34 CFR 363.11 of the VR regulations, VR agencies must describe their goals and plans to distribute Title VI funds for the provision of supported employment services. VR agencies should consider the following when developing this description. Goals and plans must be based on program year and not federal fiscal year. Goals should be achievable and easily measured or assessed in terms of progress made by the agency. The description must describe activities that will be conducted with the funds reserved for youth with the most significant disabilities, which are provided under the Supported Employment A award. Note that the provision of extended services must only be provided for a period not to exceed 4 years or until a youth reaches the age of 25, whichever occurs first. VR agencies must also describe how they will leverage other public and private funds to increase resources for extended services and expanded supported employment opportunities for youth with the most significant disabilities. States must include these updates with each submission and modification of the unified or combined state plan. Although these required updates are reported with every 4-year submission and 2-year modification of the state plan, VR agencies must also gather and analyze this data on an annual basis. Description O, State Strategies. The Rehabilitation Act and 34 CFR 361.29D of the VR regulations require VR agencies to describe the strategies and methods used to 1. Achieve goals and priorities described in Description L, Goals and Priorities. 2. Support innovation and expansion activities. And 3. Overcome barriers to accessing VR and supported employment services. When developing this description, VR agencies should consider that the description 1 must be based on program year and not federal fiscal year. 2 must be consistent with the needs identified in the CSNA results described in Description J, including VR services for students with disability, such as pre-employment transition services. 3 must include plans to establish, develop, or improve CRPs as applicable. 4 must include strategies to improve the state's performance under Section 116 16 of WIOA. And 5, must describe how the VR agency's strategies will be used to support innovation and expansion activities. Strategies regarding support of innovation and expansion activities must be updated with each submission and modification of the state plan. VR agencies should also update this description as appropriate if the CSNA was conducted since the submission of the 2-year modification of the state plan, or when there are material changes in the strategies used by VR agencies to achieve the goals and priorities identified in Description L. Although the updates regarding support of innovation and expansion activities are reported with every 4-year submission and 2-year modification of the state plan, VR agencies must also gather and analyze this data on an annual basis.
Description P, evaluation and reports of progress, vocational rehabilitation, and supported employment goals. In accordance with 34 CFR 361.29E of the VR regulations, Description P is required to describe the agency's progress on achieving the goals and priorities identified in Description L. Description N, goals and priorities and distribution of Title VI funds, performance of the Federal Accountability Indicator under Section 116 of WIOA, and the use of reserve funds for innovation and expansion activities. Agencies are expected to report on the goals and priorities for most recently completed program year. For example, for program year 2020 state plan submission, the agency will evaluate the progress towards achieving the goals and priorities identified in program year 2018 state plan for the most recently completed year at the time of the program year 2020 plan submission. Agencies should ensure that they are providing an evaluation of the supported employment goals as well as those overall of the VR program. In this description, the agency should clearly identify the VR and supported employment goals on which the agency is reporting. Additionally, the goals should be linked to specific strategies identified in Description O, state strategies, and Description L, goals and priorities, and should indicate whether the goals is continuing to the next program year, is being revised, or is being retired based on the information gathered from the Comprehensive Statewide Needs Assessment, CSNA. As noted, it is always easier to evaluate goals that are measurable. When crafting goals and priorities, agencies should consider how they will be able to determine whether the goals have been achieved when the time arrives to report the progress in this description. States must include these updates with each submission, which is every 4 years, and modification every 2 years of the state plan. VR agencies must also gather and analyze this data on an annual basis. Description Q, quality, scope, and extent of supported employment services. In accordance with 34 CFR 363.11C of the VR regulations, Description Q affords the VR agency the opportunity to describe the supported employment goals in its entirety, including the range and scope of these services, partnerships established to provide or enhance these services, and the manner and timing of the transition from supported to extended services. Thus, this information included here draws on elements described elsewhere in the state plan, including Description E, cooperative agreements with private nonprofit organizations, Description N, goals and plans for distribution of Title VI funds, and Description O, state strategies, while giving particular attention to the coordination of provision of extended services provided by other entities within the state and not funded through the VR and supported employment programs. This description should be updated when the content has changed from prior state plans.
Thank you, Jason and Shannon and April and Jim. This concludes the third in our four-part series on providing technical assistance on the submission of the state vocational rehabilitation portion of the WIOA state plan for 2020. Should you have any questions arising from this program or our previous two, please do send them to rsaquestions@ed.gov or, of course, your RSA state liaison.